To start off, I'm a 5'8", 150-pound male with the strength and ferocity of a cold, moist noodle. I'm a morning person and thought I'd shift off some packages before work. It was about 5 a.m. I parked my car facing the parcel machine, left the engine running, and went about my business. I noticed two guys in dark hoodies. It was 75 degrees Fahrenheit outside, about 50 feet from me, conversing with each other. I didn't pay much attention. Just when I had pulled out my wallet and was about to pay for shipping, both made a beeline towards me. They seemed quite nervous and were looking around. They were about 10-15 feet from me, and my fight or flight response started to kick in. At least I hope it would, because all I did was freeze and look dumbfounded. I have a conspicuous dashcam mounted under the rearview mirror, well visible to anyone passing by, and difficult to mistake for anything else. One of the guys most likely caught a glimpse of the camera, turned his head away, and tried to cover his face. The one closer to me stopped, visibly confused, and confronted the one concealing his face. I couldn't hear what they whispered, but some of the words may have been "don't" and "away." The leader turned to me, mumbled something, and asked if I could tell him the correct time. I did, and they walked away. Sure, two guys in the smartphone era, and none of them has the correct time. Not to mention the fact that the business complex had a large exterior LED screen displaying the current air temperature and time. It seems absurd from every angle. Why would a common street thug fear a dash cam? They could have just yanked it out. Plus, the storefront had one camera pointing at the parcel machine. And if they weren't muggers, that's an awfully weird way to ask for the time. I'm keeping my dash cam as a good luck charm, if nothing else. In 2021, I was involved in a murder case involving the father of my childhood friend. I frequently slept over at his house, maybe 3 times a month on Saturdays. He and his father never got along, mostly because his father was an abusive alcoholic. However, they never argued in front of people. Whether it was to save face or for some other reason, I don't know. But I never witnessed it. This was just what I was told about him. We were playing on his PS4 at the time when his dad called him downstairs. I assumed he'd be back soon, so I paused the game and went on my phone. However, they kept shouting for so long that I got tired of it, turned the game back on, and raised the TV volume close to maximum. Despite this, I could still hear them, though it mostly sounded muffled. About 20 minutes later, I heard what sounded like a glass bottle breaking. I was scared and didn't know how to respond, so I stayed in the room for 30 minutes. Eventually, I decided to check, since my friend still hadn't come upstairs. When I went downstairs, I saw his dad lying in the conservatory, bleeding from the back of his head. I initially thought they had argued, leading my friend to hit his dad, rendering him unconscious, but the man was dead. There was no pulse. I could elaborate on how we acted, but I'll skip that. We hid the body in a barrel, similar to a white oak American barrel. We were young and knew it would be discovered eventually, but it was mostly to buy time. I was also worried about being sent to jail and didn't want to confess my involvement. My friend gaslighted me into helping, saying that I would suffer too if I didn't. I wasn't in the right headspace when I was young, so I believed everything that he said. We put the body in the barrel to cover the smell, as there were no openings aside from the cover. 3 days later, my friend turned himself in. I didn't get charged because they considered my age and mental state. My former childhood friend, whom I'm not allowed to contact again, got 6 months in juvenile detention. The court ruled it as self-defense because the father was abusive and the act was accidental. He was close to being charged with manslaughter because we hid the body for a few days, but he was lucky. He claimed he was just scared his father would kill him, though I know he acted in a fit of rage. These events took place when I was about 8 years old. I lived on the second story of an older yellow house. My bedroom had a big walk-in closet with something unusual living inside of it. As a child, I didn't understand that something was imaginary until one day I was playing in my room and mentioned to my brother about seeing a tall figure in a black cloak. He didn't seem to know what I was referring to, so I dropped it. I wanted to keep playing with my Barbies without him leaving, so I didn't say anything further. The tall figure had black skin and bright red eyes. He would talk to me, but he mainly liked to stay inside the walk-in closet, so I would play in there with him. My mum would catch me talking to him, but she told me years later that she thought I was just talking to myself since no one else could see him. One event I still remember is when my grandmother came up from Texas to stay at our house for a few days. She slept in my room since there was nowhere else to put her. I remember during the first night, we had to close the closet door, essentially trapping my demon friend. He screamed the whole night, telling me to let him out. It was a loud, deep voice that made the floor shake. I would try to talk back to him, but he wouldn't listen to me. I cried the rest of the night, but my grandma never woke up during this. Eventually, I did fall asleep, but the next day, he disappeared from the closet and didn't return for weeks. That was the scariest thing that ever happened to me in that house as a child. I remember when we moved houses. My parents needed to go back to get a few final items. I feared the house and wouldn't go in. So I sat in the car. I remember looking at the house since we were parked across the street. I looked at the windows, and there he was, standing at the window, staring directly at me. I was frozen, staring back at him. I was alone in the car, so I screamed and moved down in the seat. Now as an adult, I realized that wasn't a normal imaginary friend. It was a demon of some sort. Come to think of it, I never knew his name. I made up a name for him as a child. I used to call him Mr. Potato Head, because his skin looked curled up, like when you peel a potato. His skin was red underneath, and looked infected. His eyes were bright like burning coals in a fire. I remember not being able to look directly into them without feeling faint. Instead, I would just look at his hands, which were burnt as well. However, he was kind to me when my brothers were not. He would calm me down when I cried about anything bad that had happened that day. But I guess overall, maybe he had other plans for me. Thankfully, I'll never know. I was 14 at the time, living at home with my parents and my 10-year-old sister in a typical suburban house in Connecticut. I had always believed in ghosts, but I had never experienced anything paranormal, and I never wanted to. My mum has always been infatuated with ghost shows and paranormal TV. She finds it fascinating and is always open to it. 6 months prior to the event, my aunt, my mum's sister, was diagnosed with melanoma. It was terminal, and treatment did almost nothing as the disease progressed. It was really a waiting game to see when, not if, the treatment would stop working. Towards the end of her treatment, I distinctly remember a heaviness in the house. Whether it was my mum's sadness or just a general feeling, being home felt dark. For context, it's important to know the layout of my upstairs. My house was a standard 2-story, 4-bedroom home. My room was directly next to the staircase, with my parents' and sister's rooms being on the other end of the house, right next to each other. My house was oldish, not haunted old, but maybe 30, 35 years. The floors upstairs would creak if you walked on them, something my sister and I knew all too well as we would sneak around all night looking for snacks, only to be caught by my father. One night before my aunt's passing, I was lying in bed with my door open. The hall nightlight dimly lit the area, just enough so it wasn't pitch black. As I was lying there, I distinctly remember a gut-wrenching feeling of heavy energy and uneasiness in the house. I hated having my door open, but my parents had a rule that it needed to be for safety. Suddenly, I heard horrific, heavy footsteps running from my parents' room, down the hallway and then down the stairs. Fast, heavy footsteps. I sat up immediately and just listened. The footsteps went down the stairs quickly, with a heaviness that was the scariest part. Imagine a big man in work boots going down the stairs as if his life depended on it. Next, the light turned on, and my father hauled ass down the stairs. I could hear him searching the house while my mum stood at the top of the stairs looking down. I asked, "What's going on?" And she asked me, "Were you out of bed?" I said no. My dad came back up, asked me the same, checked on my sister, who was sound asleep, and then double-checked to make sure no one else was there. My mum ended with, "Just stay in bed for the night," and left it at that. Nothing more. I remember being more scared than I had ever been before. It was my first unexplained encounter. My mum told me it might have been someone coming to visit before taking your aunt home. I didn't know how I felt about that, but either way, those footsteps remain in my memory. Forever. This wasn't that long ago. I went on a road trip to my family for a small reunion, because the family was starting to break apart again. I was far away from all of them, so it was obviously going to be a long ride. After about a day of driving and pulling into gas stations, I needed sleep. Obviously, you shouldn't drive when you're tired. I pulled into a motel, which seemed normal at first. There weren't many people there, just some workers and a couple. Despite all the stuff that had happened in my past, motels weren't that scary, and I knew everything that happened at them was only in horror movies, not in real life, but I still felt slightly on edge. I went to the front desk, got my room, and brought my bags. I'd only have to stay there for a night. The room was cozy and had nice lighting, the type that comforts you. I got to sleep fine, but at 2 a.m, I woke up. A weird feeling washed over me, and I now felt very uncomfortable. I figured getting up and getting a drink or something could make me calm down a little. There was a coffee/tea machine in my room, and a cup, so I made myself some warm tea since I wasn't a fan of coffee. I drank the tea and then attempted to go back to sleep. Probably 5 minutes after I closed my eyes, The phone that you used to call the front desk went off. I knew it was best not to answer, but I was too scared, and I wanted to know why I was being called. I picked up the phone and just heard a faint buzz, like the sound you'd hear when the signal of a TV is cutting out and it makes that glitching noise. I ran to the reception area, opened the door, and realized no one was there. Not the receptionist or any of the workers. Again, just a faint buzz and a radio going off in the back room of the reception. It wasn't a walkie-talkie, it was the type of radio that plays music. Keep in mind, this wasn't in the 90s or earlier. This was recently. Classical music was playing on the radio. In a way, this wasn't really that weird. Maybe I got a prank call, and the receptionist was just sleeping or something. And all the workers were too. This thought comforted me a little. I turned around, and a man was there. The man was tall, definitely above 6 feet. "What do you need?" the man asked. I told him about the call. He said it was a regular occurrence, and that it only happens to people who deserve it. Deserve what? I didn't ask. I didn't want to prolong the conversation any longer than necessary. I walked back to my room. During the rest of the night, the phone kept going off. It didn't stop at all. I got up again and went outside when I noticed the man standing outside my window, but with his back turned towards it. "What are you doing?" I asked him. He told me he just wanted some air. I went and got a drink from the vending machines. I walked back and realized that the man was gone. My door was wide open. I went back in, closed and locked my door, and got back into bed. Yes, I ignored my door being wide open. I was too tired and couldn't be bothered with anything else. I woke up again after sleeping for probably about an hour to the sound of knocking on my doors, not just my front door, but my bathroom door as well. Oddly, my door wasn't locked, but I ran at it. If someone was out there, I'd knock them over and have time to get to the front desk. I got to the front desk, and this time the receptionist was there. I told him about everything that had just happened. He told me I sounded crazy. I told him about the call. He told me that that never happens, and that whoever told me that doesn't work there. I went back to the room with the receptionist, and the man wasn't there. In fact, there was no sign of him at all. But I know it was real. I know it happened. I never saw that man again.